For more than 1,000 years, the Picts were treated as Scotland's vanished mystery people. Roman writers described enemies beyond the frontier. Medieval stories gave them exotic origins. Their carved stones displayed symbols no one can translate with certainty. And later legends claimed their kings passed power through women because Pictish society followed a secret maternal system. Then, in 2023, scientists reconstructed 2 high-quality genomes from people buried in Pictish Scotland. One came from Lundin Links in Fife, the other came from Ballintor in the Highlands. Researchers expected the DNA to settle where the Picts had come from. It did, but not in the way the old stories predicted. The 2 individuals were not descendants of an unknown northern race. Their genomes fitted inside the genetic world of Iron Age Britain. Yet their strongest modern affinities did not point neatly toward the eastern political centres once ruled by Pictish kings. They connected broadly with people in western Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Northumbria. Even more strangely, 7 maternal lineages from one Pictish cemetery showed no direct shared maternal ancestor, weakening the popular claim that Pictish society was organized through one local matrilineal dynasty. The dead had answered one mystery and opened another. If the Picts were largely local descendants of earlier Britons, why does modern Scotland contain such sharp regional genetic boundaries? Why do people from the Northern Isles stand apart from mainland Scots? Why can a genetic map distinguish the northeast from the southwest, and sometimes separate communities only a few kilometers apart? And if Scottish ancestry is ancient, why do prehistoric genomes show that the population of Britain was transformed almost completely? Not once, but twice? The answer is that there was never one original Scottish person. Modern Scots descend from layers created by migration, population decline, isolation, cultural change, and repeated mixture. The first post-glacial hunter-gatherers were followed by farmers whose deepest ancestry came from the Aegean and Anatolia. Those farmers were then largely replaced by people carrying substantial ancestry connected to the Eurasian steppe. Later, Britons formed regional societies that outsiders called Picts, Britons, and Gaels. Norse settlers transformed the Northern Isles. Medieval migration connected eastern Scotland with England, France, and the Low Countries. Centuries of movement between Scotland and Ireland added still more, but those layers did not blend evenly. Mountains, islands, sea channels, political kingdoms, and marriage networks preserved different combinations in different places. Scotland became one nation, while its genomes continued remembering several histories. To find the first layer, we have to return to a landscape almost no one alive today would recognize. During the last ice age, glaciers covered much of Scotland. As the climate warmed and the ice retreated, plants, animals, and people moved north into newly habitable territory. Evidence from sites such as Cramond and the island of Rum shows Mesolithic communities living in Scotland many thousands of years before farming arrived. These people hunted, fished, gathered shellfish and plants, made stone tools, and moved through coastal and river environments. They were part of the wider Western European hunter-gatherer population. Ancient genomes from Britain suggest that some individuals may have had combinations of darker skin pigmentation and light eyes that do not fit modern assumptions about early Europeans. Yet no one should imagine one stable hunter-gatherer tribe occupying Scotland unchanged for millennia. Small communities moved, divided, exchanged partners, and adapted as coastlines and forests changed. Their genetic legacy in later Britain became surprisingly limited. Around 4000 BCE, farming appeared in Britain. For generations, archaeologists debated whether local hunter-gatherers learned agriculture from continental visitors, or whether farmers themselves crossed the sea. Ancient DNA gave a clear answer. A 2019 study of 6 Mesolithic and 67 Neolithic individuals found overwhelming support for agriculture being introduced by incoming continental populations. The new farmers ultimately descended largely from communities connected to early Aegean and Anatolian farmers. Their ancestors had spread west through the Mediterranean world, mixing to a limited degree with European hunter-gatherers before reaching Atlantic Europe and Britain. Genetic similarities suggest that many British Neolithic people were connected especially to farmers who had traveled through Mediterranean and Iberian routes. When they reached Scotland, they brought domesticated animals, crops, pottery, new burial traditions, and a completely different relationship with land. Communities cleared forests and created permanent or repeated settlements. They constructed chambered tombs and eventually some of Europe's most remarkable stone monuments. Orkney became an important Neolithic center, with sites such as the Ring of Brodgar, the Stones of Stennis, Maeshowe, and the settlement of Skara Brae. These monuments are often described as the work of Scotland's first farmers, which is true culturally and chronologically. But genetically, the people who built them were not simply local hunter-gatherers who changed their lifestyle. Incoming farmer ancestry became dominant, while the earlier population contributed only small and geographically variable amounts. The first great transformation had occurred. Then, after Neolithic societies had lived in Britain for more than 1,000 years, another population arrived, and changed the ancestry even more dramatically. Beginning around 2500 BCE, objects associated with the bell beaker phenomenon appeared in Britain. The name comes from distinctive bell-shaped pottery, but the archaeological package could also include new burial customs, archery equipment, metalworking, ornaments, and drinking vessels. Across Europe, bell beaker objects did not always travel with the same population. In Iberia, the style could spread mainly through cultural exchange. In Britain, ancient DNA showed large-scale migration. A major 2018 study analyzed genome-wide data from 400 prehistoric Europeans, including hundreds associated with beaker material culture. In Britain, the spread of the beaker complex brought high levels of steppe-related ancestry and was associated with the replacement of approximately 90% of the earlier gene pool within a few hundred years. The statistic is often repeated as though 9 out of every 10 Neolithic people were killed in one invasion. DNA cannot show that. Population replacement refers to ancestry over generations, not necessarily a single massacre. Disease, declining local populations, social disruption, unequal reproductive success, migration, conflict, marriage networks, and the expansion of incoming communities could all contribute. The genetic outcome is clear. The exact human process remains debated. The newcomers were not unmixed Yamnaya warriors riding directly from Ukraine into Scotland. Their ancestry had already traveled through continental Europe and mixed with earlier European farming populations. By the time beaker-associated migrants reached Britain, they carried a combination of steppe-related ancestry and other European components. Still, the change was enormous. The descendants of the people who built Scotland's Neolithic monuments contributed only a limited share to the population that followed. Modern Scottish ancestry derives far more from the Bronze Age populations established after the beaker transformation than from the original monument builders. This is the first truly unsettling reveal. The ancient stones remained visible, but most of the ancestry of their builders did not. Even then, Scotland's population history did not freeze. A large ancient DNA study published in 2022 found substantial migration into southern Britain during the Middle to Late Bronze Age. Between about 1000 and 875 BCE, ancestry connected to early European farmers increased in England and Wales through migrants genetically similar to people from continental Europe, especially France. But the pattern was not the same in Scotland. Northern Britain followed a more independent genetic trajectory and did not receive that continental-related ancestry to the same degree. Migrations affecting England cannot automatically be applied to Scotland. Britain was already becoming genetically regional before written Scottish history began. Some researchers have suggested that the later Bronze Age migration into southern Britain may have helped spread early Celtic languages. Genetics cannot identify the language spoken by a skeleton, and the origins of Celtic languages in Britain remain debated. The old image of one Celtic race sweeping across Scotland with identical genes, art, and speech is not supported. Culture and ancestry do not travel as one package. People can adopt a language without major migration. Migrants can change ancestry without replacing local identity. Objects can move through trade. Political elites can impose names on populations that remain genetically similar to their neighbors. This becomes essential when the Picts enter the story. The Romans never used the word Scottish. They described different northern peoples and eventually used the name Picti for groups beyond the imperial frontier. The term appears in late Roman records and may have been an outsider label. Pictish kingdoms later controlled much of northern and eastern Scotland between roughly the 3rd and 9th centuries CE. They resisted Roman power, constructed fortified sites, produced elaborate metalwork, and carved animals, mirrors, combs, weapons, abstract forms, and mysterious symbols into stone. Their language is poorly recorded, but names and inscriptions indicate that at least much Pictish speech was Brittonic Celtic, related more closely to Welsh and Cumbric than to Gaelic. Legends made the Picts exotic because surviving written evidence was scarce. Some medieval origin stories placed them in Scythia or other distant lands. The 2023 genome study directly challenged those narratives. 2 high-quality Pictish genomes were genetically connected to the Iron Age population of Britain, supporting local development rather than a mysterious migration shortly before Pictish history. But the researchers also found regional structure. The 2 mainland Pictish individuals were not genetically identical. In earlier Pictish period, people from Orkney were distinct from mainland contemporaries. Scotland contained internal variation before the Viking Age. The study compared long-shared DNA segments between the Pictish genomes and modern populations. The mainland individuals showed broad affinities with present-day Western Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Northumbria. They showed less sharing with present-day Eastern Scotland, even though Eastern Scotland contained major Pictish political centres. That does not mean modern Western Scots are pure Picts, or that Eastern Scots lost all Pictish ancestry. Only 2 high-quality mainland genomes were analysed, and modern populations have experienced more than 1,000 years of movement. The surprising pattern may partly reflect substantial immigration into eastern Scotland during the medieval period from southern Britain, France, and the Low Countries. The result reveals continuity and change at the same time. The Picts were local Britons, but the modern people occupying Pictish territory are not a perfect frozen copy of them. The maternal evidence created another reversal. Medieval sources were interpreted to mean Pictish kingship passed through women, leading to claims of matrilineal society. Researchers sequenced mitochondrial DNA from 7 people buried at London Links. They found no direct common maternal ancestors among them. This does not prove women lacked political importance or that no matrilineal customs existed. It does show that the cemetery was not simply one maternal dynasty, and that the old genetic claim was too confident. During the 9th century, Pictish and Gaelic political worlds became increasingly connected. Gaelic language and identity eventually became dominant in the Kingdom of Alba, the predecessor of medieval Scotland. Older histories sometimes describe this as Gaels from western Dalriada conquering and replacing the Picts. The genetic evidence does not require mass replacement. Gaelicization could spread through royal politics, church networks, elite marriages, language shift, and the creation of a new kingdom. Pictish people did not need to vanish biologically for Pictish identity to disappear historically. Their descendants could become Gaelic-speaking subjects of Alba. This is one of the central lessons of Scottish genetics. A people can disappear from written history while their ancestry remains. Modern population research found a broad northeast to southwest genetic divide in mainland Scotland, centered near the River Forth. The geography resembles, imperfectly, the historical separation between northeastern Pictish territories and southwestern Gaelic or Brittonic kingdoms. The same research identified distinct clusters in the borders, Highlands, Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland. But a modern cluster is not an ancient tribe preserved in blood. The northeast-southwest pattern can reflect isolation by distance, geography, later migration, and many centuries of marriage within regional communities. Historical kingdoms help explain the map, but they are not the only cause. The borders cluster genetically closer to people from England than many other Scottish groups, reflecting geography and long movement across a political frontier that changed repeatedly. Eastern mainland clusters also show more English-like ancestry than some Western populations. Highland and Hebridean communities display stronger signals of isolation. In the Hebrides, long stretches of shared ancestry and lower estimated gene flow reflect generations within a smaller island population. Then, in the north, the map changes sharply. Norse raiders appeared around the end of the 8th century, but in Orkney and Shetland they did far more than raid. Scandinavian settlers established farms, families, political authority, and a Norse-speaking society. Earlier uniparental studies sometimes produced higher figures. Because Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA trace only narrow family lines. The Norse contribution is lower in the Hebrides, and much lower across most mainland Scottish regions. A 2019 analysis estimated about 7% Norwegian-related ancestry in the sampled Hebrides, and around 4% in northern mainland Scotland, Argyll, and the Isle of Man, though individuals in later studies can differ. These numbers do not mean a Shetlander is exactly 1/4 Viking in any simple genealogical sense. Statistical ancestry components compare modern populations with reference groups and summarize thousands of family lines. Norway itself changed genetically after the Viking Age. Isolation and genetic drift can also exaggerate regional differences. The verified conclusion is strong enough. Norse settlement fundamentally shaped the Northern Isles and left a measurable legacy that remains far more concentrated there than across mainland Scotland. The sea did not isolate Scotland from Europe. It connected different parts of Scotland to different worlds. The western coast and islands maintained deep links with Ireland. Gaelic language, church networks, trade, warfare, and migration crossed the North Channel. Dalriada included territories associated with northeastern Ireland and western Scotland, although historians debate exactly how that kingdom formed. Genetic affinities between southwest Scotland and Ireland reflect many periods, not one single 5th century invasion. Later, the medieval kingdom attracted settlers from England, Normandy, Flanders, and elsewhere. King David I and his successors granted lands to nobles and encouraged new towns, religious institutions, trade, and administrative systems. These movements had stronger effects in some lowland and eastern regions than in remote highland communities. In the modern era, migration accelerated again. Large numbers of Irish people moved into industrial Scotland, especially during the 19th century. Highland clearances displaced families within Scotland and sent others overseas. Cities drew people from rural districts, Europe, the British Empire, and eventually the wider world. A study designed around grandparents from one locality can reveal older regional structure, but it cannot define everyone who is Scottish today. National identity and citizenship are not genetic clusters. This is where the viral North African claim fails. Commercial genealogy stories have sometimes highlighted rare Scottish paternal or maternal lineages with distant affinities to North Africa or the Near East. A rare haplogroup in a few families does not demonstrate a major Moorish migration into Scotland or a hidden African origin for the Scottish population. Individual lineages can travel through Roman, medieval, Atlantic, or modern networks without reshaping the national gene pool. The same caution applies to clan surnames. Two people sharing a clan name may descend biologically from different medieval families. People adopted surnames through loyalty, landholding, marriage, employment, or political protection. Conversely, descendants of one male ancestor can carry many surnames. Y chromosome projects can identify branches within particular surname groups, but they cannot prove that every Stuart, Campbell, MacDonald, or Douglas descends from one clan founder. Clans were social and political communities, not genetic laboratories. This does not weaken Scottish identity. It removes a false burden from it. No modern Scot needs to descend directly from a Pictish warrior, a Gaelic king, a Norse settler, or a Neolithic monument builder to belong. The people who created Scotland were repeatedly transformed, and many of the most celebrated Scottish traditions developed long after the deepest genetic changes. Tartan patterns were standardized and reinvented over time. Clan systems changed through medieval lordship, warfare, royal law, and later Romantic revival. Gaelic culture was strongest in regions that did not represent every Scot. Lowland Scots language and culture followed different histories. Norse traditions shaped the islands. Brittonic kingdoms influenced the south. Modern Scotland emerged by connecting these histories politically, not by proving they shared one pure biological origin. Ancient DNA reveals three foundational ancestry layers common across much of Western Europe and Britain: Western hunter-gatherer-related ancestry, early European farmer ancestry, and steppe-related ancestry. Scotland carries all three, but their route into the country involved at least two dramatic demographic transformations. The hunter-gatherers were largely replaced when farming arrived. The Neolithic farmers were then largely replaced after the Beaker migration. After those upheavals, later migrations usually added regional layers rather than replacing the entire population. The Picts emerged locally from Iron Age Britain. Gaelic identity spread without requiring the biological disappearance of the Picts. Norse settlement transformed the Northern Isles far more than most of the mainland. Medieval and modern movement made Eastern, Western, Highland, Island, and border histories diverge further. There is one more reason the Scottish map matters. Fine-scale genetic structure is not only historical decoration. Isolated populations can preserve rare variants that occur at different frequencies from those in large urban datasets. Researchers studying Orkney, Shetland, the Highlands, and other regional communities have shown why medical genetics must sample people beyond major cities. A risk estimate trained mainly on one British population may perform less accurately in another, even inside the same country. The same geography that preserved traces of Norse settlement or local isolation can therefore influence modern health research. But medical relevance must not turn regional variation into biological ranking. The differences between Scottish clusters are small compared with the ancestry shared among them, and every community contains individual variation. A map can identify statistical patterns across many genomes. It cannot inspect one person and determine whether that individual is Highland, Pictish, Norse, Gaelic, or Lowland in any complete cultural sense. This is also why ancient DNA cannot award ownership of Scotland. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherers arrived after the ice. The Neolithic farmers crossed seas. Beaker-associated migrants came later. Gaels, Norse settlers, medieval nobles, merchants, laborers, refugees, and modern immigrants all entered landscapes occupied by earlier people. If belonging required descent from the first population, almost no one anywhere could belong to a homeland. Scottish identity was created through residence, memory, law, language, labor, conflict, and participation. Genetics can reveal who mixed with whom, where isolation lasted, and when ancestry shifted. It cannot measure loyalty, citizenship, or the meaning of home. That distinction protects science from nationalism. Ancient genomes are most valuable when they make the story more precise, not when they are forced to certify a pure nation. Scotland's DNA is remarkable because it records repeated population change alongside strong cultural continuity. The nation endured not by keeping every newcomer outside, but by repeatedly deciding who could become part of the story. This makes the Pictish result especially fitting. The people, most often treated as Scotland's lost race, turned out to be neither biologically isolated nor erased. Their ancestry flowed into later communities, while their public name disappeared. The kingdom changed language, rulers, and identity, yet human continuity survived beneath the political transformation. In that sense, the Picts were not an exception. They were a preview of Scotland itself, a population repeatedly renamed, reorganized, and mixed, but never reducible to the label used in one century. Ancient DNA did not discover the one true Scot. It proved why such a person never existed, and never could have existed in reality. That is the final answer hidden in the Scottish genome. The Scottish people were not one ancient Celtic race that survived every invasion behind mountains and mist. They were descendants of populations that arrived, declined, mixed, shifted language, and adopted new identities. Their greatest continuity was not biological purity. It was the ability to turn population change into a lasting society. The Pictish individuals in the opening did not reveal a secret foreign ancestry. They revealed something harder for mythology to accept. A mysterious person could be genetically ordinary local Britons and still create an extraordinary identity. Their symbols, kingdoms, and resistance came from culture, not from belonging to a separate human type. Their DNA survived after the word Pict disappeared. The same is true of the Neolithic farmers whose monuments outlived most of their ancestry. It is true of Norse settlers whose language disappeared from the islands while their genetic contribution remained. It is true of Gaelic kingdoms whose culture became national history, even though Scotland contained many other ancestries. Scotland was never one bloodline. It was a landscape that kept turning newcomers and survivors into Scots.